Okay, so I've never particularly considered myself a believer of the paranormal, nor am I a complete skeptic. I mean, I turn all the lights on to go to the toilet if I've watched a scary film or been reading some decent paranormal stories, so I must believe, at least to an extent. Bit of backstory. My dad lives in the Scottish Highlands, has done for the last 20 plus years, and I drive the 14-hour round trip to visit as often as possible, 2 or 3 times a year. I've always loved this journey, especially if I'm by myself, as there's around 2 to 3 hours of motorway, followed by back roads through the mountains, through forests and around lochs, where I can put my music on and pretty much just switch off. For the most part, there's little to no phone reception, so I generally download a couple of playlists before I go, pop my phone in its holder, and blindly follow the sat-nav until it loses signal. I've been doing this journey for years, so really I have no requirement for the sat-nav, but I love to try and beat the ETA. It can also be quite handy when it has signal to let me know if there are any accidents or diversions ahead. Anyhow, on this particular journey, I was coming home. I had set off at nightfall as there's far less traffic on the overnight journeys and less chance to get stuck behind holiday makers, especially caravans. I hate caravans. I was traveling south in January, and the weather was something else. My car showed an outside temperature of -12°C or 10 Fahrenheit, and the snow barely stopped. It hadn't stopped since I arrived at my dad's house 4 days earlier. My wipers were on full speed, but still the snow kept piling up on my windscreen, meaning I had to drive around half my usual speed. Every now and then there'd be a short break in the snowfall, and everything just looked magical. It was like driving through a Christmas card. Looking down into the valleys, everything covered in a thick white blanket and lit up by the dim glow of the overhead moon, making it possible to still make out the river weaving its way through the cracks in the deepest crevices, reflecting what little light there was. On these roads, there's nothing in terms of lighting, and what's worse is there can quite often be a large drop on either side of the road. Couple this with 3 to 4 feet of fresh snowfall and an inability to see any of the road, and you've got the potential for a lot of accidents. In order to combat this, there's 8-foot-high sticks on the side of the road with reflective tape at the top, red on one side, white on the other. Drive between these and you should be okay. So I was driving and driving. The snow just hadn't given up, and I was focusing on the red and white reflective tape to keep on the road. Up ahead, I saw the dim tail lights of another car, a welcome sight as it was the first I'd seen in over an hour. Everyone else must have known that it was a bad idea to be out in this. Instead of focusing on the reflective sticks, I was now focusing on the tail lights of the car ahead. I couldn't quite work out what make or model it was. A lightish, white or light grey SUV of some sort, holiday makers. I thought this because I could make out their roof box and bike rack. They too must have ignored the warning signs to not drive tonight. When I sped up to try and make some ground between us, it seemed to speed up too. If I slowed down, they slowed down too. The space between us remained a constant. I decided that my headlights must have been annoying them in their rearview mirror, so I kept the distance as it was, blindly following their lights whilst being mindful to try and keep my tyres in the most shallow bits of snow on the road, avoiding the occasional snow mound. A bit of time lapsed. I have no idea how much, as I had now switched off entirely, listening to my mix of 90s old school dance, the howl of the wind and splat of snow on my windscreen, and in between wiper swishes, watching the red lights ahead of me glow in the dark like the eyes of a demonic beast, intent on keeping its distance. I noticed the car ahead start to take a turn off the road and felt a sudden sense of sadness and loneliness. I was losing my travel buddy. the only other sign of human life I'd had for the last few hours. I then realized that, having been so intent on following the car in front, I had no idea where I was, which isn't an issue. I essentially just had to stay on the same road for 3 hours until I reached a fork in the road, turn right, and then onto the main road and see a little roundabout. Bizarrely though, my sat-nav now just displayed lost GPS signal and had me as a dot on a white background, convenient as everything was covered in snow. It never did this. It had usually downloaded enough of the route to at least keep the map on screen. It was then that I got an overwhelming urge to follow the car ahead. I knew I shouldn't. I literally had no turnings I needed to make off the road, and I really didn't recognize the road they were taking. And the more I think of it, I've never noticed a turnoff that goes down the side of the mountain like this did, but maybe I just never looked. I decided to follow it. Of course I did. If I ever think I shouldn't do something because it could end up in regret, I'll probably do it. Although, as I neared the turning, I started to doubt myself and thought I should stay on my road. But no matter how much I wanted to keep the wheels going straight, my hands and body wouldn't allow it. I turned off. I didn't recognize this new road. I didn't recognize the old road when I was on that either, so it really made no difference. Everything was white. Everything was dark. Lots of trees and the reflective sticks. If anything, it looked exactly the same, like I hadn't turned off at all. 10 to 15 minutes later, the car ahead started pulling away from me, only slowly, but faster than I wanted to drive in these conditions, so I let it. It couldn't really get away anyway, as there was nowhere to go from this road, so I figured I'd see it again shortly. Another 10 minutes or so passed of driving alone, and then, in the distance, I spotted lights again, and this time I was catching up, quickly. The lights were flashing in the dark distance. Amber, nothing. Amber, nothing. Great. My travel buddy has got their hazard lights on, and they've stopped. I decided I'd have to pull over and see what was wrong. As I pulled up behind my buddy, a white Audi, possibly a Q3 or Q5, I'm not sure, I noticed the amount of snow on their car. Surely far too much for them to have just stopped, and there's no tire tracks for me to pull into, but it was 100% the same car I'd been following. I came to a stop just as a woman in a big blue coat ran to my window waving her arms. I'm not the most empathetic of people, but it didn't take much to read the relief on her face and see that she had been crying. She had had to pull over because she'd had a puncture, and then explained that she had been waiting there, unable to call anyone as there's no signal, and thought she'd have to wait until the morning before she could leave. She had had her ignition on while listening to music and tried to keep the DVD player running for her little one, pressing the heated seat button each time it turned itself off until it wouldn't come back on. Her battery had died. I thought she was being a bit dramatic. It was literally only a few minutes since she pulled away from me. She can't have been here that long. Over 4.5 hours. That's how long she said they had been there. Over 4.5 hours sat in her car with her 18-month-old child in -12°C temperatures, with no phone signal, food or drink, and no way to heat the inside of the car up. So this wasn't the car in front of me for the past 2 hours, but it looked exactly the same, even down to the dark grey roof box and bike rack. Coincidence? A big one. But that's not all I can logically think. I suddenly felt angry. Angry that the car in front of me hadn't stopped to help. Maybe they thought I would. That's a bit presumptuous of them. I asked her if she had tried to flag them down. A look of confusion or concern spread across her face. She told me that there hadn't been a single car go past while she had been there. But I stopped myself from going any further, from explaining that I'd been following a car that didn't exist for over 2 hours. She was scared enough from being sat here in the dark for the last few hours. I jumped out and looked in her car. Assisted by the light from my headlights, I saw her little one was fast asleep. I asked her if she wanted some coffee from my flask. She said yes. I knelt down in the snow. She'd already tried removing the nuts and had left the wrench on the floor next to the wheel. It was covered in a layer of snow and freezing cold. I jacked up her car, removed her tire, and replaced it with the pitiful space saver from the boot. I lit a smoke and pulled my car next to hers, connected the batteries, and instructed her to start her car. Once it came back to life, we stood and spoke. I asked her where she was going. Sterling, she replied. Brilliant, I'll follow you. Again, I thought. That's my route. She thanked me for helping her, for talking to her, and for calming her down. She thanked me for the coffee and gave me a quick hug, quick enough to be meaningful, short enough to not be overly awkward from a stranger. She got in her car and set off. I got in my car, and I sat for a moment staring at the all too familiar tail lights of the white greyish SUV with a roof box and bike rack, lit up a smoke and set off. I sped up, caught her up and slowed down. She pulled away. Her speed remained a constant. I kept wondering how she didn't see the other car. The other car that was exactly the same as her car. I kept wondering how I now knew where I was. But yet we had not turned off or turned on to any other roads. As we neared the civilization of the A-roads, I started to become aware of the tracks left by my new travel buddy, the tracks in the snow left by their tires. The tracks in the snow that I'm 99% certain were not there when I was following her, or the other her before I stopped and offered her coffee. The snow eased as we entered a town called Kilmahog. We reached a junction, and she turned right. I turned right. We were now driving in sleet, wet snow that leaves a dirty grey and brown slush on the ground. Wet snow that makes seeing much harder than normal dry snow. As we approached the roundabout, she indicated left for the first turning. I indicated right for the last. I pulled alongside her. She looked, waved goodbye, and left. Someone, or rather something, took me that way that night, diverted from my normal route, made me feel as though I had no other option but to follow that car, guided me to a stranded woman and her child, in freezing conditions with no food, water, or heating. I'm still unsure how to explain it. I've not really thought about it too much. I don't like not being able to understand things or give them a logical explanation. It makes me feel uneasy. Ironically, I was in quite a dark place at the time and remember thinking that I could easily drive off the road and it would be days until my car was found. Nothing like being alone in your own thoughts, eh? This ghost car gave me something else to focus on. The woman and child gave me a bit of an uplift. I don't remember being fearful at any point, more unsure and cautious, although that could well have just been due to the driving conditions. I certainly never thought too much about the paranormal. I've always presumed if the paranormal was real, it would present itself to me if it needed to. If not, I'd live in blissful ignorance. But now I don't know, and to me, that's worse than knowing.
In 2001, my grandpa, who I always referred to as Pop-Pop, was diagnosed with prostate cancer. I don't know the details, but I remember thinking it wasn't too bad. because my family downplayed the whole thing constantly. I had never suffered a death in the family. I'd never even seen a dying person before, so I had no way to judge how Pop-Up was actually doing. So I accepted my dad's insistence that his father was doing just fine. Eventually, the doctors told my family to take Pop-Up home. My parents assured me it was because he was getting better. Obviously, my dad would be at my grandma and Pop's house every morning to help out however he could. And every morning, after he had done everything he could for them, he would return home and ask if my sister and I would want to go see them. We'd obviously say yes, so he'd hop back into the car and take us back out to their house. One day, I remember having a really strange dream. It was cowboys and Indians. I've never been interested in westerns at all, but my Pop-Up loved them. Suddenly, my Pop-Up appeared in my dream. Well, not in my dream, more like in front of it. He mouthed something inaudible, and I woke up. I looked at the clock. It was around 7:30. Way too early for a 13-year-old boy to be up, but the dream had shaken me, so I crawled out of bed. My sister was already up, which was equally strange, so I said my good mornings and grabbed some cereal. Around noon, my dad comes home, and as usual, he asks if we want to go see Grandma and Pop-Up. By this point, he knows he doesn't need to ask, but habits are hard to break. We load up the car and head over, and here is where everyone feigns surprise out of politeness. Before my dad turns off the car, he tells us, "Guys, I have some news for you. Pop-Up died this morning." I was stunned, for many reasons. Obviously, first, I thought he was getting better, and second, because I recalled my dream and realized what it was my Pop-Up was saying. He was mouthing goodbye. I later realized he died around 7:30 that morning, the same time he appeared in my dream. Furthermore, my dad would always bring our dog with him to my grandparents' house, a little Jack Russell called Lucky. Lucky would always hide under the hospital bed my Pop-Up was in. The day my Pop-Up died, Lucky skulked out from under the bed, and as he took his last breath, Lucky looked off to the far side of the room and let out a chilling howl. Not all that terribly fascinating, but I suppose the true stories rarely are.
I'm kind of known in my country. A few movies, TV series, plays, but I'm most of all a common person who still can't figure out what happened. I started looking for a house when I was 5 months pregnant with my first child. I decided it was time to find a place of my own and stop living in rented places, since I wanted my baby to have a home, especially since my own life had been quite nomad. I looked at many ads, visited many places, but the apartments in the neighborhoods where I wanted to live were really tiny, until I found the perfect place. The right neighborhood, parks all around, great cultural life. The price was great, and it was an old 3-story house. The 2 upper floors, a 240-meter square duplex, were on sale. From outside, the house was very old, seeming to come from another time. Inside, it was better than all my dreams. Carpeted, great wood, very well kept. The main bedroom at the top of the house was huge, large windows, and the main bathroom had a large jacuzzi bathtub. I decided to buy immediately, in love with the house. I moved as fast as I could. The first year was great. I had my baby girl, and my cats loved the house. They hated the downstairs corridor, but nothing else. From time to time, my mother and some friends told me that they had a strange feeling, and there were noises. The nanny didn't like much staying alone with the baby. My grandma said it was too big a place for just a baby and me. My dad is French, so I was raised in a very rational, Cartesian way. Noises? It's an old house. Cats are scared. Cats are always kind of nuts. Nanny and Granny are wonderful but superstitious. Then I met a man. He lives in another town, but we decided to spend 2 or 3 days a week living together at my place. We wanted to have a baby. My firstborn was 4 when I had my DIU removed. The doctor told us we'd probably be pregnant after 6 months or so. I don't believe in marriage, so we had our own love ceremony, with candles, chimney fire, and my older daughter throwing flowers at us. 3 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night, anguished. I looked at the alarm clock. It was 3:33 a.m. One thought was very strong in my mind. I'm pregnant with a very strong witch. After a few seconds, my usual skepticism returned. I laughed, thought it was absolutely ridiculous to think I was pregnant 3 days after trying, and I just fell asleep again. I forgot about it until one day 2 weeks later. My eyes hurt. I had pink eye and I felt drowsy. We went to the doctor. He asked if I could be pregnant. I said I could, but it was really early to know. The doctor agreed that after so long with a DIU, it was unlikely. Unlikely, but real, as we found out a few days later when I had the early pregnancy test done. My eyes were perfectly fine after a day or two. I was not drowsy anymore. My partner, my daughter and I were so happy expecting the baby. Everything was perfect about this pregnancy. No morning sickness, nor feeling tired. Nothing like with my firstborn. At the 4th month ultrasound, they told us it would be a girl. We couldn't be happier. My due date was on July 7th, 2007. That very unusual date was also a good reason to laugh about it and wonder how special she would be. 3 weeks before the due date, I started to feel contractions and hurried to the clinic where she was born. A wonderful strawberry blonde, grey-eyed baby. Before going into the story, I have to tell something weird that happened earlier. I didn't give it a thought for a few years. I remembered it as crucial later when most things started making sense. My first baby was growing healthy, beautiful and smart. She only had a little problem from time to time. Strong nosebleeds. The pediatrician told me it was very important. Her nose vessels would grow to be thicker later on. Plus, the dryness of the area was probably a cause. So no big deal in a few words. Except one day, it always became a great deal. She was almost 4 years old and decided to sleep in my bed. I can't believe the luck that she did so. I woke up because she made strange snoring sounds. I wanted to put her on the side, but when my hand touched her, I felt something weird. There was something warm, wet and clotty under my fingers. I turned on the light, and her lower face was covered with blood. I took her in my arms. Around her, a great circle of blood tainted the bedsheets. I took her to the bathroom immediately, where I washed her little face, really scared. She woke up surprised, but so tired. I put some paper towels in her nostrils, very tight, as an uncle who was a doctor had taught me to. The bleeding continued. I asked her to put her face upwards, trying not to panic. Little by little, the bleeding stopped. She was pale. I gave her something to drink. She was shivering, and I covered her in a blanket and put her in her bed while I cleaned up the mess, trying to find out if I should go to the doctor immediately or wait. It was winter. It was freezing outside, and the thought of calling a cab to take her to a hospital and then wait for the care was terrible. She caught colds easily. She was sleeping peacefully a moment later, and I decided to let her rest. I waited for the morning to come and took her to the doctor. He said we could cauterize her nose vessels, but in fact, there was no special reason for the bleeding. Maybe she poked her finger into her nose too often. He told me to give her a lot to drink to compensate. The same day, I made our luggage and took a bus to the countryside, where I had a small house near the town in which my partner lived. After 3 days of eating a lot of barbecued meats and drink as much orange and tangerine juice as she could, she was completely recovered. My partner told me we should take her to the doctor as soon as we were back in town, but once we did, he told us we'd be better off putting some Vaseline and nose drops on her nostrils before sleeping. We tried it out and it worked well. The mattress still had the trace of blood, and after trying in vain to remove it, we changed it. My daughter's nose kept on bleeding from time to time, but not to the point of endangering her life. When my second daughter was born, nevertheless, and my partner decided to stay with us for a few months, we realized these nosebleeds happened at specific moments. They occurred after weird noises around the house, or when things moved, or the cats were unusually nervous. The last time she had a terrible nosebleed that scared us all happened when my youngest was 3 years old, and after many terrible things had happened in the house. Her nose bled like a faucet just in front of us, and a shaman, who was trying to close what he said was an entrance to other worlds. But that wasn't until a few years and many more experiences later. When my first daughter was 6 and my baby a year old, a former boyfriend I had deeply loved died. We were in touch from time to time and cared very much for each other. We had met when we were teens and studied acting together. We both had been in various countries apart since then, but the great memories and tenderness were always there. I was so shocked when I was told he died that I pretended nothing happened. I didn't want my partner to feel bad either. Anyway, keeping such a sorrow secret is terrible. Without noticing it, I fell into depression. It started more or less around this horrible nightmare I had. I could feel myself lying on a bed, my head down on a pillow and feeling sick. I could sense my stomachache and nausea as vividly as the pillowcase, soft under my cheek. I tried to throw up all the things I had mixed, a few drinks and pills, but wasn't able to. Then someone came into the room and panicked, saying, "He's dead," and going out to seek for help. I remember feeling totally scared, paralyzed and horrified. I couldn't believe I was a man and I was dead. I thought I could still try to wake up and throw up. I would be fine, but it was impossible. I kept making efforts to wake up, and finally, I was able to. I was laying on the bed face up. There was no way I could have felt the pillowcase under my cheek. I looked upside and saw the ceiling and its lights. There was sun around me. My hands moved to my chest, checking up if and when I felt my breasts. I realized I was still a woman, and most importantly, a living woman. It was still me, and had 2 daughters in the house and a partner. I started sobbing, in a mix of anguish and relief. This was the beginning of a terrible depression. At the beginning, I just thought I was tired. I slept less and less, migraines almost every day. One day, I told a doctor at my workplace about my awful headaches. He asked me to close my eyes and did some neurological tests. When he told me I was dealing with a strong depression, I laughed, asking him how come I wasn't sad. I had a great life, great job, stressing all right, but fulfilling. He just gave me the address of a psychiatrist and a neurologist. I spent long months adjusting medication and self-medicating. I was able to realize the sorrow I was going through. Nevertheless, insomnia and depression were not the worst. In the few moments I was able to sleep, I started to see things in a dreamlike way. The nanny and my older daughter told me that the few moments I slept, my hands moved in the air, and I spoke nonsense. I just remember the vivid nightmares representing people at the very moment of their death. Random people. A scared kid in a swimming pool sliding board with an impatient dad pushing him, and the kid hitting his head really strong at the end of the slide. An old person alone in a room, sad and coughing to death. A family who didn't realize there was a gas leak. Every time I opened my eyes, I kept feeling their anguish for a while. It was unbearable. People at work were very supportive and let me take my time, but suicidal thoughts were recurrent when I wasn't busy. I had to hire another nanny because I didn't feel strong enough to take care of my kids. On the weekends when my partner arrived, I spent time outside trying to get tired. During this time, many weird things started happening in the house. Some of them were good, others simply terrifying. Good things like me being very tired and just being able to sleep while my baby had a bottle in her mouth and suddenly receiving a ball of paper on the forehead and waking me up to take the bottle off before her sleeping. Bad things like nannies hearing footsteps behind them. One of them was pale one day because when she was in the restroom, she saw the doorknob moving over and over, but there was no one behind the door when she opened it, or hearing a voice whispering her name at her ear until she decided to leave. I had to take some time off work. Good things like getting into the house and seeing someone smile at me at the entrance of the dining room, realizing it was nobody alive but the person I had lost. Bad things like more of my older daughter's nosebleeds and increasing terror. The bell. We had an electric doorbell upstairs at the entrance of the upper floor suite. I put it there because my daughter thought it was fun to ring it before getting into my quarters. But then, it started ringing out of nothing, or so we thought. In fact, it rang at specific moments. It happened when the kids did things I told them not to do, or when I saw a program containing something that scared them. I realized the doorbell helped me pretty much with the kids. One day, I was hearing music, and one of the cats kept staring at the door. The cat seemed petrified for a while, and then ran away under a chest of drawers. While the cat was running, the doorbell rang, and the song changed to "Can't Get My Eyes Off You." By that time, I already had a hint of who this ghost was. In fact, we got so much used to its presence that I usually opened the door and said, "Come in, dear," when I heard its characteristic sound. I also had fun when one of the kids looked at me and said, "I didn't do anything this time." Unfortunately, it wasn't the only presence in the house. In general, I was feeling better from my depression, but there were times in which, without explanation, I felt so bad that the only thing I could do was curl into a fetal position on the floor and wait. Going outside the house made me so anxious, I had to be back as soon as possible. One night, I don't remember what I mixed. Pills, alcohol. My older daughter, who was already 7 at the time, called my parents. Half an hour later, when they arrived, I was talking to the furniture and to my watch. They told me I intended to go buy Christmas presents in the middle of the night, and that I was wearing a coat over my pajamas, sitting on the bed with knives around me. The next morning, I was at the hospital, treated as a depressive patient. After a few doctor's visits, they reassured my parents, telling them that it wasn't a suicide attempt. Another day though, I don't remember much either, except from a headache that I felt was killing me. I went down the stairs faltering. The nanny got so scared she called my parents once again. I ended up at the hospital. I kept on asking the nurses to open the windows because I craved for air. They never did and kept me from opening them. I realized later, because we were on the 8th floor and this time they really believed I was suicidal. My partner arrived and had the patience to be there for us for some days. The house. We traveled for some vacations to the beach. These days made me feel much better. When we were back, the doctor diminished my medication dose. I wasn't that agoraphobic and even invited a few friends over from time to time. One of them had never been to my house yet. He was impressed and said he had always wondered how it looked from the inside, because he'd always seen it while passing by, and his sight was always drawn to the house. He added the ghost stories about it probably helped his fascination. I asked him what he was talking about. I knew years before the place had been the house of a former, very intellectual president, and the neighborhood has always been seen as bohemian and filled with artists. In fact, it was one of the reasons for my choice too. My friend told me that it was the place where many intellectuals held meetings, discussing books, poetry, music, and even politics. Then, it had been abandoned for a while, and the rumor of it being haunted spread. People saw some lights on and heard people talking, especially in the room where my library is. One day, some teenagers dared each other to get inside the house by midnight. They climbed the wall and entered the backyard. By that time, the 6 kids started feeling scared. One of them, nevertheless, said he would go inside. He got in through the basement and climbed the stairs, heading to the room in the corner where the lights appeared from time to time. It was easily recognizable since it's semicircular with 4 large windows. The thing is, the friends waited and he didn't come back. His brother, who was part of the group, tried telling the others to go inside with him to see what happened, but nobody wanted to. After insisting and getting really worried about his brother, he also went into the house. He heard voices and was pretty sure some squatters lived there and attacked his brother, but as the others wouldn't help, he kept on going towards the room. When he arrived there, it became silent and he saw the shape of his brother on the floor. He turned on his flashlight and saw what he first thought was his corpse on the floor, his face dripping in a puddle of blood. He screamed and called the rest of the friends, but instead of helping, they ran away. The kid managed to carry or drag his brother downstairs to the basement and outside. His brother had no injuries. He just had blood coming from his nose. He didn't remember much, just walking towards the glimmering lights and the voices, and seeing a group of people dressed in a very old-fashioned way, having what seemed to be a very interesting conversation, and then nothing more. The story spread, and many people didn't even want to get near the house at night, until a grandson of the former intellectual president modernized it and lived there for a while, passing it to his niece, who finally sold the house to me. I finally understood the reason for the price, and thinking about my daughter's nosebleeds, I still felt chills down my spine. The child and the ghosts. Time went by, I was feeling better and working more of the time, and the children were growing. We were pretty much used to the noises, doorbell rings on the upper floor, etc. My older daughter just avoided the downstairs corridor. The little one already walked and spoke. In fact, she had a long talk with someone I couldn't see. I first thought she had an imaginary friend, but then many weird things showed me it wasn't. One day, I was writing something, and I used the word widow. She glanced back at me, asking what did widow mean. I explained to her, but disregarded it, thinking I might have mumbled the word. But more things happened. She was very jealous, and one day, she said angrily, "I know you were kissing Dad last night, don't do it." I asked her how she knew, and she told me her special friend told her. There was no way she could have known. One day, I heard her running, tumbling and almost falling while I was in the living room, and she was going upstairs. When I joined her, I told her to be careful. She was not supposed to run on the stairs. She looked at my left, angry. "Why did you tell her?" I asked her what happened. She told me she was sure he had told me that she ran. She kept on berating the air. I told her I had heard her, and she just looked to my left side, saying, "Okay." Another day, she told me proudly she was a model, and her stage name was Jelly Belly. I laughed so much until she asked me why. When I told her, she shouted to her invisible friend, "That's a dumb prank. You're mean." My little one was terrible in other senses. She made a mess around her all the time, climbed on furniture, and had so much energy it took time running after her. By that time, I had hired another nanny, because the little one was such a tornado that in the afternoons, when her sister was home, She needed someone to watch over her exclusively. Many times I got angry at her and told her to be careful, or put her things back in a box, etc. She usually started crying, especially since me scolding her also meant interrupting her games. She used to go to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. I heard her explaining why she was mad at me. And then usually, no, I'm not going to. It's not fair. After a while, she always opened the door, came to my arms and apologized, not without giving a glance behind her. I would always hug her, and she behaved better for a while. I won't deny it, this ghost was very helpful. So one day, I was looking at an old photo album, and my little girl came behind my back. "That's him. That's my friend." It was my former boyfriend, dead too early. At that moment, it all seemed so evident. So I had to get used to my kids having talks with my dead boyfriend, when she also started developing a very peculiar behavior. Sometimes when she met people, she couldn't stop poking them. I remember in particular one friend of mine, a nice young man, very sensitive. I left him in the living room while I heated water for some tea in the kitchen. When I got back to the living room, my little one was there sitting on an armchair with a toy, ignoring him. I asked her if she had at least greeted him. She looked bewildered. "Do you see him too?" She stood up and poked his face before saying hi. She went to ballet classes, trying to do what her sister did at the time, and the teacher told me she made some other kids feel uncomfortable since she sometimes got near them and poked them. Fortunately, dancing wasn't her main interest. Another day, we were at a country house with my parents, and some friends arrived. They had 4 children. My little one stared at their youngest. When she thought I wasn't looking, she poked her face. I told her to stop. Next thing I see is my kid licking the arm of the other girl. Once more I told her not to, and understood that we had to talk about it. She told me she wasn't sure if some people were seen by everybody or just her. She had to check. Later, my mum did tell me that this other child did die for a few moments at birth, and they had a lot to do to get her breathing again. I didn't check the backstories of my sensitive pal nor some of the ballet girls, but I think some people have something special that made my daughter doubt of the reality and confuse her with other ghosts she used to see. Activities go wilder. For some reason, this was about the time things got worse. The nanny hated being alone since she heard footsteps following her and someone whispering her name in her ear. I guess I didn't help. The 2 or 3 times she rang the door upstairs, I opened the door and screamed because I was expecting the usual ghost, but it was a living human being instead. One day, for instance, a very annoying and self-conscious journalist came over for an interview. Every time he asked questions about anything but art, the microphone stopped. At the end, I was so puzzled I couldn't stop laughing nervously. The man seemed very annoyed. At the end, we managed to make a decent interview. One of the editors, who is a friend of mine, told me later he assumed I was playing a prank on him and kept a grudge on me. On Christmas Eve, my partner arrived. He was going upstairs and the lights went out on the stairs. He was getting used to arriving to my place and his mobile phone going dead, as if the battery just ran out at my house. But this night, he didn't feel in the mood to take it. He said out loud, "Anyway, no big deal, it's an old house. Cables are old. Nothing paranormal here." And the lights went on again before the doorbell rang just in front of us. He said, "Okay, I'm wrong." We were just getting used to it. My partner was even sure that it was something against him, since the lights went off when he arrived. Things disappeared to appear later in unbelievable places, etc. For instance, once I was making some chili con carne, I had cut and diced tomatoes on the cutting board and put them in with the beans and meat. I was so focused on adding the right quantity of condiments, I didn't pay attention to anything else. I wanted to wash the cutting board when I saw a clear trace of a hand on it. It was obvious someone leant on it, despite the rest of the tomatoes. A perfect hand seemed drawn. I was pretty sure it was my partner, who was most of the time distracted. I got angry since he probably hadn't even noticed that he put his hand in the remaining cut tomatoes and probably went over the house, opening doors, touching walls, who knows what, with his palm covered in tomatoes. When I asked him, he assured me he didn't do it, not even by accident. I insisted. He approached his hand to the cutting board, and it was definitely smaller. Just in case, I put my hand next to it, and the track was longer than mine too. So going back to my old skeptic self, I thought I might have done it while scraping the board with the knife. I tried a few times, with no resembling results. Then I realized I hadn't paid attention to the detail. The track of the hand had a pinky finger's tip, a little twisted. I remembered my late boyfriend having it broken in sports. I took pictures of the cutting board just to try to find a possible logical explanation later on. Never did. Witches. So the doorbell kept ringing, the nanny scared by sounds, movements and appearances. And one evening, I had to admit something really weird was going on. We had 2 doll witches hung from the ceiling for decoration. My older daughter said, in order to bug her sister, the most beautiful one was a representation of herself, and the other was her sister's. I didn't like the fact that she kept telling her sister that she was the beautiful and smart one, jokingly. I said if I was the doll witch, I would get so mad I'd start moving. And there it was, spinning by herself. It was indoors, no open window, and it was just one of the 2 witches that started moving. I laughed. It was so ridiculously incredible. My 2 daughters stared at the witch and seemed scared. My little one said, "Mum, make them stop." I didn't know what to do, so I just said, "Okay, stop now." And it did. They asked me how I did it. I told them it hadn't been me. During the following days, they started spinning out of the blue more and more often. They usually stopped when I told them to, but they took more and more time to do so. The nanny saw it a couple of times and started freaking out. My partner thought it was some kind of telekinesis, but I wasn't able to make them spin on purpose, and they did, even when I wasn't there. We started taking that seriously, especially since they were able to spin in opposite directions and speed at the same time, which, I had to admit, was above my understanding of physics and scared my kids. We took them away. By that time, intrigued, I started investigating about ghosts. The evidence of orbs seemed very disappointing to me, since I was pretty sure they were just particles of dust caught by the light. Nevertheless, I had a long talk with many people, and they posed some questions that made me rethink my beliefs. Questions like, why would you see orbs in a specific place? Or plenty in a picture and none in the next one. I paid more attention to the pictures I took, and mostly the ones with my kids had tons of orbs around. Even more suspicious was a picture of the girls and me, taken automatically 10 seconds apart from one another. In one of them, the 3 of us were there, smiling together, and my little one had closed her eyes. The second one was better. The 3 of us looked happy, but a grey shade was next to my smallest daughter. Not just an orb, but a white shape seeming to move. Another picture called my attention. My little one sitting by the bed, and over her, a blue shade on the corner of the wall and ceiling. In fact, I was so surprised that I first thought it was some kind of spot on the painting. It wasn't. My partner made me realize it was at the exact spot where the doll witches used to be. The last drops. One night I woke up. There was a strange smell, something like smoke. I sat on the bed, scared. I stood up, smelling, looking for the source of the smell. When I got in front of my older daughter's bed, I saw a cloud of grey smoke over her. I shouted for my partner to come and help me find the fire. We looked all over her bedspread and the blankets, under her bed. There was nothing, but we both could see the smoky cloud. I asked him to go and see if it was coming from the kitchen or the chimney of my library. I was wrapping my kid up in the blanket in case we had to leave the house, and ran to get my second child ready when he came back and told me there was no fire. I asked him if he had smelt it or seen it. He said he saw it, but there was no smell at all. I couldn't smell it anymore either. The cloud of smoke we both had clearly seen had vanished. At least we both had seen it. I checked the house once more before going back to bed. Then, again, another night. A weeknight around 9. The girls and me were chatting and playing upstairs. We stopped at once when we heard 3 loud knocks at the upstairs bedroom door. I couldn't imagine who that could be for a minute. Then, I obviously thought of the 2 people who had the keys and lived in the city, my aunt and my nanny. My aunt never came to my house without calling before, but I thought she might have had an argument with my mum. The nanny could also have had a terrible problem. Anyway, the only possibility was it was someone close in distress. I asked, "Who is it?" No answer. I asked again, louder. Nothing. Alright, the other possibility, it was a burglar. What kind of burglar would have knocked at a second-story door? A cynical one. Knocking at the door would be like a stupid joke or intended to scare us. Okay, if there was someone trying to attack us, sooner or later they would break up the cathedral glass, open the door, and hurt us. I shushed the girls and told them to hide under the large bed. I took an iron bar I kept under my bed, a knife, and opened the door, with the clear idea of fighting whomever it was. I opened the door abruptly. No one was there. I turned on the stairs light and shouted once more, asking who it was. No answer. I came back to the bedroom telling my girls I was going downstairs to check, and meanwhile, they should start calling the cops. I walked down the stairs and checked every single corner of every single room, feeling my arms tight around the iron bar. There was no one. There wasn't even any trace of someone having entered the house. This episode was somehow the beginning of the end. One day, I felt the urge to go to the laundry room on a Sunday afternoon and found the iron on, really hot. I turned it off and asked the maid about it the next day, but she insisted she would have never forgotten to unplug it. Even more, if she had forgotten since Friday night, we would have noticed a smell, and there would probably have been a fire. Seemed logical, but I wasn't sure until the end of the month arrived, and the electricity bill had no extra charges whatsoever, nor the next month. Time went by. I had more and more insomnia, and felt depression was back to stay. The maid left. The nanny got more and more scared because she heard someone whisper her name behind her ear more and more often. She decided to quit, and I had no choice but to take some time off, stay at home, and try and take care of everything. I only accepted work very early in the morning so the kids wouldn't be alone. Noises above the rooftop scared the girls, even though the friend ghost was apparently there reassuring my younger child. Cats went crazy at times, staring at something I couldn't see. It was too much. Getting rid of the spirits. My partner was very anguished and decided we needed a solution. I had heard the mother of a producer I used to work with was supposed to be a medium, so we decided to call her. The lady asked us not to eat meat nor have sex for a few weeks before she would visit our home. I was able to deal with the no sex part, but meat was one of the rare things I enjoyed, and I didn't give up on that. The lady arrived, and when she asked if we had followed her instructions, I was honest. I guess I secretly wanted her to say, "Too bad, can't work with you then." The idea of getting rid of all the spirits, all of them, meant the ghost of my love would also go away. I guess that was something that kept holding on to me. Still, she visited the house, saying how bad the vibes were. She started burning plants and scented wood all over the place, and once she got into my library, she said it was time to close portals. My little one stepped in front of her. "If you do that, my daddy won't be able to come back anymore." Her dad, my partner, looked at her puzzled. My little one kept on staring at the lady, making her visibly uncomfortable. I was wondering what her idea was about the ghost and herself. Anyway, we continued the ceremony. At the end, the lady advised us to go somewhere else for a few days or weeks. My partner said we could go to the town where he lived, in which I had a little country house. I loved that house, especially because of the large garden and woods. So did my children. Still, I felt there was no way I would abandon my place at this moment. Apparently, my little one felt the same, because she said, in a way I was unable to believe from a 3-year-old kid, "Mum, don't listen to this lady, she's crazy." The lady kept on looking at my kid. She then told me, "This child is an evil spirit." That was enough. The lady had to go. We closed the door behind her. Nothing had changed in the house, besides the smoky smell of plants all over the place. Since, things continued more and more often against everyone who entered the house, including my partner. We still felt there was something to do. I couldn't keep having insomnia and visions. Even the cats were upset with the doorbell ringing, lights on and off, music changing by itself. We all talked as a family. We had to put an end to it. The shaman. So my partner contacted a shaman. I felt a terrible animosity against him since I heard him on the phone, but still, we had to do something. When he arrived, I didn't like his cocky attitude, but I was polite. He asked us to sit in a circle around a charcoal incense burner. He muttered many things while turning around us with a scented stick of wood burning in his hand. Suddenly, my older daughter started bleeding from the nose. Her nose was dripping so hard, even the shaman seemed impressed. I ran to get some Kleenex and a wet towel to try and stop the bleeding. The shaman kept on making circles around her head with worried eyes. I kept on trying my earthly ways to stop my kid's nose bleeding. Suddenly, the bleeding stopped. I felt a strange change in the house. My little one, for once, was quiet and calm. I was horribly tired, and unexpectedly, I felt nothing but gratefulness for the shaman. He went around the house, cleansing every room with scented smoke. Even before he finished, I went to bed and fell asleep like a baby. My house is very peaceful now. One night, I dreamt of my late boyfriend. He told me he had to go, but would still be there visiting us. In my dream, I cried a lot, hugging him. He told me not to forget, every second is infinite, and instead of crying, we should just enjoy being together. I held him, kissed him, but still woke up crying. Sometimes, on very particular occasions, the bell still rings upstairs, and a few times, he appears in my dreams. I've learned to let go, but it took time and tears. I still have insomnia from time to time, but now I know how to take it calmly. My daughters are growing up nicely. Life is good. I hope afterlife is good too for most people.